Now let's talk about permissions. Permissions are somewhat self-explanatory, but there are a couple of things you need to see. Obviously, permissions are what we use to control access to our securables by our principals. Now let's talk about these terms here. The principals for most instances will be the users, the logins. The securables are the objects they're trying to hit, a table, for example, a stored procedure, that sort of thing, the objects. So the users are trying to hit the objects. Now we need to know what exactly can these users do to these objects, and that's where our permissions come in. So the permissions control the access. Now, permissions are one of three things. They're either granted, which means you can do something explicitly. They're revoked, which means you can't do that explicit action. Or they're denied. That says you can't do anything. And we'll take a look at the various levels of those a little bit later on. So our permissions are always in those three states. What's interesting is that in SQL 2005, permissions are now inherited because since our securables are now like in scopes, we can now inherit these permissions down across the various scopes that are included inside other scopes. I don't know if that makes any sense. You'll see it in just a second. This should help. Let's think about this example. Our securable is our server. So we're going to apply permissions at the server level. And you're going to notice quite a few new permissions that you have in 2005, a lot more granular control. First of all, at the server level, there's a permission called connect_SQL that gives you the capability to connect to the server. Then there's a create login permission that gives you the ability to create a login. Now, if I granted you the ability to create a login, that means you can create logins. If I revoke the ability to create a login, that means you can no longer create a login unless you have that capability or that permission granted to you because you're a member of a different group that has it. Okay, but I haven't denied it. I've just said you simply can't create logins because you're a member of this particular group anymore because I've removed that permission. But if you're a member of another group that has that permission, then you can still create logins. However, if I deny you the ability to create logins, you can't create a login no matter what group you're a member of. So that's how those tend to work. Then a control server permission. This is what we know as sysadmin. If you have control server permission at the server level, then you have full administrative rights on the server. And notice that's inherited down across all the various tables and so forth. Now, very similar to what we had before, except that you'll see later in some of the scopes, this is a little different as far as how we can control inheritance. Then on the database, let's say that our securable is a database, so we're applying permissions to a database. Notice we have a control permission that gives full control of the database if that's granted, and a create table permission just like we had before. These are very similar to previous versions of SQL, but again, Microsoft has separated the levels and they've given you a few more permissions, so you have a lot more granular control. Okay, so now we've looked at the three pieces of security, the way Microsoft has exploded it now. And so now let's move from here and let's talk about managing our logins and users, and let's take a look at the schemas and so forth.